Whispers from Below, a horror podcast by Justin W. Geis. Scary stories, both real and fake. Hello, listeners. Welcome to Season 2, Episode 7 of Whispers from Below, a podcast by a madman for madmen. I'm your resident psychopath, Justin W. Geis, and today's topic of discussion is zombies. So I love to give disclaimers before each episode, so I'll just let you guys know that this one is pretty chill. There's really not a lot of info that's like groundbreakingly horrifying or anything like that. I know the past two episodes have been number one about clowns, and number two have been a little bit darker. So I wanted to do one that was a little bit lighter. This is less inherently spooky and more of a history lesson, if that makes any sense. Just kind of talking about like where zombies come from, how they sort of developed in pop culture and media and, you know, that sort of thing. And just a lot of my own like chatter and opinions. Before I get into the episode, I do want to say that I know I haven't been uploading on that Thursday slot anymore. It's just not super doable for me right now. But again, as you guys know from listening, this will go up Mondays at 8 a.m. every single week. But the Thursday slot will be for a bonus episode that I might start doing a little bit later. I'm going on vacation soon, so I'm trying to sort of just relax before I get to do that. But anyway, let's get into the episode. So, first of all, let's just start with like a baseline, like what quote unquote makes a zombie? Like what constitutes zombie? One of the traits that you kind of have to have is having like a ravenous hunger, this sort of like primal instinct. In a lot of media today now, zombies talk. That wasn't really a thing for a long time. Until maybe like early 2000s-ish was a time when they started to create the sort of like speaking zombie, the zombie that's able to think. Up until then, zombies are kind of like very primal. They normally eat either human flesh or sort of like rotting flesh to survive. Normally it's done by being like a reanimated corpse, like a reawakened corpse, or it's done by a virus. So as we start to get into later decades of zombies and their creation and things like that, it's less about being dead to start with and more like a virus. Like when you get into like specifically in video games like Resident Evil, Last of Us, it's like it's more of a disease that gets people rather than like this sort of rising from the grave scenario. But they're pretty much always undead. Like once the disease hits you, you die and you reanimate. Like you're pretty much always undead. In some versions, it can affect animals, but in most, it's only human beings. So Western zombie folklore, if we're gonna put it that way, and sort of like zombie folklore that we understand and know today, was extremely influenced by Haiti. For those of you that don't know, Haiti is a huge voodoo community. It's really big there, which is why like a lot of like Haitian Creole people in New Orleans are really big into voodoo, and that's why that is also a big voodoo town, because people from Haiti kind of came over and shared that part of the culture. And voodoo is not inherently spooky or bad or terrible. I actually would love to do an episode on it in the future if you'd like to hear more about that. Let me know. But Haiti is really big into like all these rituals, and it's such a huge part of their culture, which is where sort of this zombie thing started. W.B. Seabrook wrote a book titled The Magic Island. He wrote it in 1929, so like, you know, way back when. And it's a story about this voodoo cult in Haiti that sort of created a bunch of zombies. And this is the first time that the word zombie is really like used in media that's being consumed by the masses. Time commented, like the magazine, commented that this book, quote, introduced zombie into U.S. speech, unquote. And what's interesting to note is that zombie doesn't have an E on the end of it. It's Z-O-M-B-I. The word zombie, as we know it, it's kind of debated where it came from. It's either from like West African culture or like Haitian culture, with, you know, a bunch of different root meanings, meaning like spirit or fetish or like things like that. The use of zombies in literature has always kind of used the concept of like a brainless reanimation, especially, and I talk about it a little bit later, but especially from H.P. Lovecraft and Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, which are two, like Frankenstein is an extremely popular book. A lot of people have to read it in school. And a lot of people love the book. It's considered like a classic, and Lovecraftian lore is just kind of like, again, a future episode topic probably. But it's this spooky sort of universe that he's created. So from the time of like Magic Island being sort of like the first introduction of the word zombie, these books prior had a lot of zombie influence, a lot of zombie lore. And again, I talk about it a little bit later in the episode, but it's just one of those things where it's interesting to note, like, without using the word, you can directly tie it back. Like, they never state that it's a zombie, but it has like the same characteristics, and you can see where people got their inspiration for things. Films now start to adapt this like magic, you know, this sorcerer that creates these mindless, you know, heathens, these thralls. They start to adapt this idea from like the 30s to like the 60s. There are films like White Zombie and Plan 9 from Outer Space that sort of encapsulate this idea of like one magical wizard controlling like a horde of thralls that he uses for his bidding or whatever. When Night of the Living Dead came out, it sort of reshaped how a lot of people felt and saw the zombie archetype. Up until that point, again, it was like a magic situation. It was like, well, I killed him and then I rose him from the dead. You know, like it's that sort of vibe. And it's always with like, you know, sort of like a Haitian or an African tribe, or it's always something like that. And then it's sort of to change it to just like, now they're just like reanimated corpses. We don't have an explanation. It's just like, here they are. It sort of changed how people thought about it, and it sort of starts to introduce the idea of like a zombie apocalypse scenario. This was also where they started to introduce the like human flesh idea, where like they have to eat human flesh to survive. Up until then, zombies were kind of just like mindless creatures that could be fed whatever. Yeah, maybe they ate people, but it was out of like survival. Like it wasn't like part of their shtick, if that makes any sense. So now they're starting to get into this idea of like they have to devour human flesh. But again, even in Night of the Living Dead, the word zombie is not used. So there's no like correlation between that word and this stuff. Like fans actually ended up calling them zombies after the fact. Like the movie never directly states that it's a zombie film. But as we know it today, it definitely is. And then in the sequel, which was Return of the Living Dead, it introduced this idea of like zombies eating brains, which is also like a super popular thing that we think of, you know, like somebody says zombie and you're like, oh, you know, slow, dumb, like eating flesh, like brains. Like, I feel like that's one of the like click words. Is that what I mean? Click word? Like if this was a video that was like zombies and underneath it there'd be like the little tags, it would be like brains. You know what I mean? Like that's sort of where my brain went, like a click word. I don't know how else to put that. I'm thinking of a different word. If it comes to me, I'll spurt it out, but it's missing right now. then we sort of move into this, like, basically the idea of a zombie apocalypse, which has pretty much been used in, every form possible at this point. But this idea really wasn't introduced until 1978, when they released Dawn of the Dead. And it was this idea that there was a zombie apocalypse that had sort of spread throughout the world, and now you have to survive. And that is an extremely popular topic. I mean, we see it all the time. They just released Last of Us 2, fantastic series of video games if you have not played it. If you really love, like, story-driven games, 100% check it out. But that's sort of the same idea of, like, there's a zombie apocalypse, and now, like, how do we survive? That sort of idea came into play with Dawn of the Dead. Then we have everybody's favorite Halloween song, Michael Jackson's Thriller, got released in the 80s. And after that, that was kind of like the definite finish line for that era of zombies. Once you see the Thriller music video come out, everything kind of slows down. Everything kind of dies as far as zombie in pop culture goes. You don't really see a whole lot of it anymore. And then we get a resurgence of zombies in the early 2000s because of Japanese films and video games. Over on the other side of the Pacific Ocean, they started to release Resident Evil and House of the Dead, which not only really, like, produced, like, a new spark for the genre, but it introduced a new idea of what a zombie could be. And I think that that's really important to note, because then a lot of games have taken that idea and ran with it, especially in, video games. And I think it's less so in film and TV, and even less in books, but way more present in video games is this idea of zombies being, like, fast paced. Like, they can move quickly, they can catch up with you. Up until then, they've been pretty much, like, slow and brainless. So to introduce this idea of, like, they're more of a threat than, like, a slow crawl, they're more of, like, a fast, like a velociraptor sort of, was a really interesting concept that hadn't really been touched yet. And for those of you that don't know, Resident Evil is a really popular series of both films and video games. And then it's kind of like a basic zombie story, but it also helped introduce the idea of, like, a virus kind of taking hold of people and creating the zombie apocalypse. As well as, like, House of the Dead is an arcade game that you can find. Still, you can find it in a bunch of arcades. I think they're in, like, Dave & Buster's and stuff. If you go and, like, check that stuff out, they're still there. There are a bunch of other games that sort of expanded this idea of what a zombie could be. Especially, like, I know I mention Last of Us all the time, but my boyfriend and I are currently playing through it right now. So that's why zombie was, like, on the brain. Is I was like, oh yeah, like, this would be a great, idea, whatever. But Last of Us and the Left 4 Dead series sort of take this idea of, like, okay, so there can be slow-moving zombies, but also there are zombies that have been, like, specialized, if that makes sense. So, especially in Left 4 Dead, I think it's more apparent. There are zombies that are called, like, chargers. There are zombies that are called witches, and there's spitters, and it's because the virus has sort of taken hold of different parts of the body and given them these weird abilities. There's boomers who just, like, kind of run at you and explode, but it, like, summons the horde to you. Spitters can shoot, like, this volatile acid at you. There's stuff like that. Chargers, like, they've been built up, like, they're super fast and super strong. Stuff like that's sort of developed differently in certain people. And it's a little bit more explained in Last of Us because it's a fungal infection. It's like a fungal virus disease that has sort of taken hold of everything. So there are these things called clickers, and they're fully covered in, like, the mushroom spores. But if you make a noise, like, they're hypersensitive, and then they can come get you, but they can't see. They see through hearing. But just stuff like that where, like, now this idea of, like, what is a zombie? What can it be? is now shaped so differently depending on what universe you're viewing. Like in Walking Dead, they're pretty basic, zombies, as far as I can remember. I only really watched like season 1, but as far as you can tell, like they're just kind of like basic zombies, and it's more about the people. But in other games, it's way more about like how does the virus take hold of different people, and how does it change things, how does the reanimation work. So it created a lot more hype, a lot more intricacies within this sort of archetype, this genre of game, media, film, whatever. And it sort of allowed people to take a different approach, which I think is really important to giving something an everlasting quality, is by letting people take a different approach. Then we sort of got, zombie comedies, which, like I love Zombieland, Shaun of the Dead. These started to pop up because as any film genre appears, there will always be satire of it. There will always be a comedy of it. It's kind of inevitable. But these movies started to pop up, which made zombies, a little bit more palatable to people if they weren't really interested in the genre before, but they love comedies. This is a less scary way to sort of dip your toe in. So again, you start to see, like, by taking it over different media, like rather than a horror movie or a thriller movie, now it's a comedy. Like now more people are going to be exposed to it, kind of giving it that quality, that popularity, the everlasting quality that I think the zombie genre has today. I don't see it going away anytime soon. Even like music has used zombies, though a lot of times it's way more for political commentary, like we are the zombies of the masses, like especially in like I would say like 60s, 70s, even like late 90s, you start to see like this political commentary come forward as like we're the zombies of the government, or we're the zombies of whatever. And so they use that as a way to sort of explain why the masses are reacting a certain way. It's like calling people sheep, it's like a similar thing, just punk rock. There's a really famous song that's a really great song for those of you that haven't heard. It's by the Cranberries. I think it came out in 94. Don't quote me on that. If I'm right, though, I'm really impressed by that. But it's called Zombie. It's by the Cranberries. I'm pretty sure it came out in 94. But it's a great song, and that's like a prime example of like using it as sort of like a political statement in music. That's sort of like the end of like, now we're kind of up to speed. That's how modern zombie origins have kind of like developed. That's how like when we see like what we think of when we think of a zombie started, like with Frankenstein basically. But there are stories of zombies that are found in like tons of ancient cultures. There's even like references like way back in Mesopotamia. They're in the Epic of Gilgamesh. I wrote this down so that I could give you the direct quote. The direct quote from the Epic of Gilgamesh states, quote, "If you do not open the gate for me to come in, I shall smash the door and shatter the bolt. I shall smash the doorpost and overturn the doors. I shall raise up the dead, and they shall eat the living, and the dead shall outnumber the living." Unquote. So that's sort of like, you see this idea of like, I will raise the dead, they will come and they will devour you, and then we will outnumber you. That's like, I think the first, if not like one of the first like written down references to the zombies that we know today that's sort of placed. And it's just fascinating to me to think that like, as a hive mind, human beings can create the same idea like across mediums, across the world. This is something I'll probably talk about again in later episodes. If you guys like episodes like this, where I'm more just talking about like history of stuff that's spooky, like vampires, dragons, unicorns, like stuff like that, you find them in different cultures spread out in different ways all over the world. Like, it's just so fascinating that we can all create these similar ideas and images without speaking to one another. It's just interesting to me. You also have a reference of, and this is where I think the line between vampire and zombie, like way back when, is kind of not drawn yet. They kind of go hand in hand. I'm going to talk about it in a minute, but their lore kind of goes like hand in hand for a little bit until they start to branch off as like vampires are a little bit more intelligent and zombies are more like slaves. But in Japanese folklore, there is this myth legend that if you don't honor your ancestors properly, they will rise up from the grave and they will feast on your blood. But they're not like hyper intelligent or like really fast. They're like slow moving zombie like creatures that feast on you if you don't honor them properly. And it's this idea of like a reanimated corpse, but in more of a like, I guess in that case, it's done more as a way to like teach morals in that culture, because it is so important, especially in Asian culture, to like honor those who have passed, and especially your family. Like, it's extremely important. So I think like that was just a way for them to sort of teach a moral in like a spooky way so that you feel more inclined to do it. Then we also have Frankenstein. We all know the story of Frankenstein. We all know the fact that Frankenstein is the doctor, and Frankenstein's monster is really, what we're talking about when we talk about zombies and whatever. Super popular book. I have not read it. It is on my list of things to read, though, so we're getting there. But it's the same idea of like this mad scientist creates this reanimated corpse, and though it's not directly a commentary on, zombification or anything like that, it is a reference to a zombie. It is a way that we think about zombies. Because like, how would you classify Frankenstein? Like, yes, he's a monster, but in the lower classifications of it, what is he? He's a dead body that was brought back to life. So though the book isn't really referencing zombies, it's not really about that. It's more about the scientist and the town around it. It is just interesting to see, that sort of take on it. A similar take to that is Lovecraft wrote Herbert West, and then it's like a little hyphen, Reanimator, in, I think I wrote 1921. I have really messy handwriting. I believe I wrote 1921. But this is like a prime example of, a mad scientist decides that he wants an army of brainless creatures. So he decides to, cheat death and create life that has not been there before. It's like that really basic story that we all have heard before. I don't know about you, but I personally hate having to go to the grocery store. It takes up so much of my day when I could be starting a new hobby with that time, like soap carving or collecting the sick bags out of airplanes. With Instacart, it makes grocery shopping fast and easy, all while allowing me to stay in my underwear. Instacart allows you to order all of the things you usually get from your local stores, delivered to your door in as fast as 1 hour. Not only that, but it will also give you smart suggestions for new items based off of your preferences, as well as highlight deals to help you save some money. The shoppers handpick perfect produce and make sure that your eggs get to you safely. You can get free delivery on your first order over $35 by following the link in the show notes. This also lets Instacart know that we sent you, and it helps support Whispers from Below. So if you hate grocery shopping as much as I do, try Instacart today and enjoy getting your groceries the easy way. It's just kind of like it's definitely more of a reference to zombies, and it's not really about the scientist at that point. It's more about like, well, I brought them back to life to cheat death, but now there's this, they're so primal, and they're brainless and violent, and they're mute, and we don't see them anymore, and they're trying to eat people, and they don't see us as people, and stuff like that. So this is, and they're not called zombies, of course. But this is sort of like the first I would say, one of the first books that's solely about zombies without actually being about zombies. But Lovecraft didn't really get super popular out west, I don't think, for a while. But yeah, just interesting to note. And like I said before, zombies and vampires sort of start in this similar historical place where you look at all these myths and legends, and there's a little bit of mixed origins for them, with this idea of people coming up from the dead, and then sometimes the vampires are slower but they drink blood, so you're like, maybe that's a vampire. But they're really slow and they're brainless and they feast on flesh, but they're really fast, so you're like, oh, I guess that may be a zombie or a vampire. Like, they kind of go hand in hand in a lot of cultures, until you sort of see this idea of a vampire being more intelligent, more suave, like sort of that Bram Stoker Dracula vibe. And then it sort of starts to separate between what is, just a corpse with primal instincts and what is this hyper intelligent being that's survived for upwards of centuries and millennia, but their roots kind of are really close together, which is just really interesting to note. And if you guys like these episodes where I'm kind of ranting and just explaining things that I really enjoy and I'm passionate about and I like researching, let me know, because I'd love to do an episode on like vampires and werewolves and that sort of thing, origins of them. I just put this in at the end because I just thought it was a really interesting concept, is this idea of like, now in media we see a lot of films and TV where zombies are kind of like romanticized in a way, like more like they're people, or they're a love interest or things like that. Like in Warm Bodies is a really good example. Even Corpse Bride is an example. Even though it's not like outrightly saying that she's a zombie, like she is basically a zombie, less of a ghost or a specter. It's more zombies. And like Warm Bodies, for those of you that don't know, I don't know when it came out. I would say like late 2000s maybe. It's like the story of like this guy that falls in, like this zombie guy that like falls in love with like a person, like a real person. And it's just one of those things where, and then there's iZombie, I think, is the other one. There's a bunch of sort of things in media now where zombies are seen more as people, and some of them can be intelligent and can even like lead lives basically, but are just dead. Like, I think it sort of plays off of the idea of like, especially in Corpse Bride, like what happens after death? Like, is there an afterlife? Is there, not, things like that. Just interesting to see how like, now that once we got like zombie comedies and we got video games where zombies were taking on these different roles, like obviously logically the next step would be to make rom-coms or like these sort of like romantic films with zombies in it, whether the zombies are, the thing that's romantic in it, or if the idea, like the zombie apocalypse and there's a romance within it, like it seems like the next step, but it's such a strange step. And now we're in that place where we see zombies popping up, but in all these really new and creative ways. And it's just interesting to me. I like going back and seeing, how things like this started, because like, if you say Halloween, like, what do you think of for Halloween? Like, what are people going to dress up as? They're like, vampires, witches, zombies, mummies. Like, these are the things that people think about, and it's so popular. It's ever present in media, and I don't see it going away for a long time. But it's just whoa, I just had like a full stroke. Like, I don't know what just happened, but I just could not speak. To me, it's interesting just to go back and sort of see the roots of this thing that is so present and so apparent. I don't know. It's fascinating to me. I hope you guys really liked this episode. I like doing episodes where it's a little bit less structured. It's a little more off the cuff. I get to kind of rant talk is a strong word. I get to rant a little bit more into a microphone for you guys. If you like this episode, please let me know, because I will continue to try to do things like this. If this wasn't your favorite format, or you want more dates, or you want more, whatever, let me know, because then I can totally do like more intense research the next time I do an episode like this. Episodes go up every Monday at 8 a.m. I know I said that earlier, but I'm going to say it again. 8 a.m. Eastern time. For those of you that are everywhere else, 8 a.m. Eastern Standard. Go check out the Instagram. Make sure that you give likes and follows and share things if you really like them. The Instagram is at Whispers From Below. No spaces, no underscores, no capitals, no nothing. You can also send me an email if you have any comments, questions, concerns. The email is whispersfrombelow@gmail.com. I am going to try to get a website going pretty soon, so that I can start doing small little orders of merch and stuff, if any of you guys are interested in that. If you want to see what some of them look like, go check out the Instagram. I have pictures uploaded there. We have hats, notebooks, pop sockets, t-shirts, hoodies. We got all sorts of stuff that I have in prototype that I've been using and wearing for months now. And if you like those things, I can start doing tiny orders of those, depending on when I get the website up. I'm thinking about starting a Patreon to get a little bit more footing and support, because the more support I can get for the show, and the more financial stuff I can get for the show, then the more cool things I can start to put out there for you guys, and the more things I can continue to do that I want to do. I have big plans for this podcast, and I need it to take off. So if you guys really like the podcast and you want to see it continue to grow, the one thing that I can ask is just tell a friend. You don't even have to share it on your social media. If you'd like to, that's amazing, and I would love that very, very, very much. But I know that sometimes that can be uncomfortable to just share things like that you love, especially with like a bunch of people that you might not know super well. But just tell a friend. If they might not like one episode, but they might like the next one. That's the cool part about this podcast, is that there's a bunch of different topics for different kinds of people. Maybe they don't listen to my serial killer episodes, but they love my haunted places episodes. Maybe somebody doesn't like the haunted places episodes, but they like my Grimm's fairy tales episodes. So there's stuff for everybody here, I think. So if you could just share it with one person, or, when this goes up, be like, check out this podcast, post on social media, do what you guys can, because the more followers I can get, then the more cool stuff I can do for you guys, and the more cool stuff I can do for you guys, then the more content I can put out. There's all sorts of stuff. You can find it on Google Podcasts, Spotify, iTunes, iHeartRadio. I think it's on Stitcher too. I upload it personally to YouTube every week. So go check it out if you haven't yet. That's pretty much all I have to say. So remember, zombies are not going anywhere for a long, 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 long time. They're not always brainless. And this pandemic isn't over. So please wash your hands and please be safe.